So, as some of you will know, this time last year we launched our podcast. It's been really successful. We've had so much interest. I think we're on number eight, I think, or even maybe, yeah, number eight of podcasts. There's a couple that went out this week. I love listening to them, so please do have a listen. They're great, really great to hear members' stories. So this is about radical reflections. It's a special live podcast, and it's a timely, practical session led by our very own Marl from Afrikala Arts and Hello Mill, and Emily Wilson from Like A Feminist. And drawing from recent evaluation of small charities they've worked on together and separately, they're going to demonstrate how monitoring, evaluation, accountability, and learning in ways that centre communities, shift harmful norms and narratives. So expect some practical tools, suggested evaluation paradigms, and systems for creating people-centred, power-aware approaches to impact measurement. So the core of their message is knowledge is power, and who creates it, owns it, and uses it matters. So Marl, I'm going to technically hand over to you. I don't know if I need to share you the slide deck, or if you, I'm just yeah, I'm leaving it to you. Well, I'll tell you what, I'm gonna hand it over to you just in case. There we go. Are you there, Marl?
Yes. Hi everybody. It's an amazing pleasure to be here 1 year on since we launched the podcast, and I am so happy that today we are doing our first ever. So welcome once again to this special Radical Change podcasts, and like I say, with collaboration with Lead Like a Feminist, and the first ever live recording of the Radical Change podcast. So personally, I can say that this is a milestone celebration. It has been 1 year, as Amber just said, since we launched this podcast. And today's session is just that, like radical, reflective, and real. So my name is Marlene, as Amber said. Please feel free to call me Mal, as most people do. I'm a feminist leader. I'm an art therapist. I'm a trustee at SIDCN, a male practitioner, and so much more. And I'm excited to be holding this space for you all today for a powerful exchange on feminist MEL and storytelling. So with me is Emily Wilson. She's a co-host with me at the Lead Like a Feminist podcast. She's a collaborator, my friend, and also a systems change con conspirator. And she brings in a wealth of knowledge and experience rooted in social justice. She's the founder and former CEO of iRise International, which is an award-winning menstrual justice organization, and more recently, a systems change consultant working across different geographies. So we are bringing to you diverse global perspective, but one shared commitment, which is building meal systems that center justice, care, and community voice. So I will start. Um, sorry, I know I kind of lost touch with my slides because I'm so excited. So I think I will proceed with that was our introduction. So sorry. I know we have very beautiful slides and I had forgotten about them for a moment there because of my excitement. So let's start with some of the basics. So MEL is often seen as rigid, technical, and donor-driven, as you had Vic before me talk so much about donor-driven approaches to different things, but we see it as deeply political and transformative. So for us, feminist MEL is more people-aware, it's people-centered, it's participatory, it's reflective, and as you can see on my on the board, it's also rooted in care. So sorry about that. So when we talk about feminist MEL, we talk about different things. So I will introduce Emily to also introduce herself more further. I've just given a brief about who she is, and then you can tell us how to define feminist MEL in our work and how it has challenged the traditional ways you've seen learning and evaluation done over time. So Emily, welcome.
Thanks, Marl. It's great to be here. So I think I wanted to start with this like little story, which is how I think of how my own understanding of kind of how we create knowledge has changed. And I think it captures that shift from like the more traditional kind of top-down evaluation approach that we're perhaps more familiar with and kind of feminist approaches. And so I kind of imagine it like you're on a journey and you're kind of coming to an island that you don't know very well, but you want to be part of the island ecosystem. You want to support it. Maybe there's people there growing stuff, and you want to get involved in helping that and being part of that exciting community. And I think what traditional monitoring and evaluation and learning says is we mustn't go on the island. We mustn't get near to the intricacies of what's actually happening. We just want to see the fruit, devoid from the context. Send us what you grow, and we'll have it on our boat several miles from the shore. But we're not going to go on the island. We're not going to look at how you're growing it. We're not going to get stuck into how you grow it, because that will somehow distort our enjoyment of this fruit. I know it's a bit silly, but I do think that's kind of the Western knowledge paradigm. It's like the further away you are, the better the knowledge, the more real the knowledge. And I think fundamentally what feminist approaches and what other kind of disruptive approaches to knowledge production are about is saying, actually, that is really silly. Obviously, if we want to be part of that ecosystem, if we want to understand it, if we want to grow the fruit, eat the fruit, we need to be on the island hand in hand, growing it, understanding it, and really being embedded in that ecosystem. And so it's about getting off the boat, getting on the island, and recognizing that is more messy. It is often more difficult, but that's the only way to truly know and understand that island. And actually eating that fruit, looking at that fruit, is never going to give you the insights. It might be simpler, it might be easier, it might be more convenient, but it's never going to give you that complex, nuanced human understanding that really creates change and that helps us actually achieve kind of meaningful things in the world. So I think that for me is the kind of the shift we're talking about. It's about getting off the boat, getting on the island, and getting stuck in. Oh, and just to say that we've got some little audience prompts on some of the slides. So please do kind of have a look at those, share them in the chat. And as we go through our podcast, we'll be pulling out a few of those and kind of discussing them. So the first one's here. So just thinking about any time that you've experienced that sort of hands-off approach as a small charity. Have you ever shared data or a story without anything coming back to you? And have you ever experienced that extractive dynamic of people looking at you from afar and kind of taking from you without really embedding in what you're doing? So tell us about those. It can be quite cathartic. Have a little rant. It's fine. It's a safe space. And we'll pick out a few as we go through. But yeah, back to you, Marl.
So talking about extractive, I think I am also the founder of a small social enterprise working in Kenya. It's called Afrikala Art. I can say that I feel like we have been victims of extractive processes, because at Afrikala, we've often found ourselves in spaces where our lived experience and grassroots insights are valued but not always respected. So you find that as a small but mighty charity, as we like to call ourselves, more of a small but mighty social enterprise, working at the intersection of creativity and mental health, we've often been invited by larger organizations to share what works within our community-based mental health programs. But often you find that once we share some of this um, lived experiences, sometimes we share ideas, and we find that sharing feels extractive. So our ideas get absorbed and sometimes even repackaged by those with more resources and visibility, while we're left out of the implementation or even recognition. So you find that these experiences have pushed us to rethink on how we as a small organization approach our monitoring and evaluation. So we've moved away from rigid log frames and top-down indicators, and even instead embraced more storytelling. Specifically, we have embraced using something like the most significant change method, which in our mental health programs, you find that now children and young people and even creatives kind of help us define what impact looks like to them as compared to how we want to show it. So they choose which stories matter to them, and then now we have to embed what feels most comfortable to them. So it's no longer about ticking boxes for donors and partners anymore for us. It's about listening and honoring lived experience, and also building systems where people feel like they are part of the change, not just observed by it. So I think when you look at power and knowledge, and as you can see on the screen, we are kind of thinking on deconstructing knowledge ownership. So we often say that knowledge is power, but who holds that power? Who collects that power? Who validates that power? Who even owns it and distributes it? Because at the end of the day, we know that some of the communities we serve, they have so much knowledge. One, they have knowledge about their needs. They have knowledge about uh, the role that they can play. They have knowledge about some of the things that might have worked in the past and some of the things that might not have worked in the past. And how often does it truly reflect the communities who share their truth? So, and as Emily said, just feel free to also share with us some of the things that you have been part of and the processes that might be more relatable to you. So Emily has worked in both grassroots and big organizations. So I think I will ask her to tell us more about where do you see power imbalances in how knowledge is gathered and used, and how can we disrupt that? So Emily, back to you.
Great, thanks, Mal. So I think the key difference is in traditional M&E, we're really concerned about reducing bias in the data set. And so we're trying to kind of, we've got our question, we know what we're trying to find out, and all our kind of thoughts and ideas are around how do we reduce bias in this process. Whereas with these different kind of power focused lenses, the bias is on the other side of that. So the biases are all on the before you get to that point. What question do you choose to ask? Why do you value it? Who's involved in deciding what matters? And it's recognizing that actually the biggest biases in how we produce knowledge are not in the data set, but in the systems that decide what matters, what questions we ask, what questions we don't ask. And I think my original background is in health. And I think, the work that I've done in health is a really good example of what that practically means. So for example, in medicine, we love a good RCT, a randomized controlled trial. We love data where we minimize all the biases. We've got control groups. We're trying to work out if we do this, does it lead to this change? And we're obsessed with that. But actually, the way that healthcare works, the dominance of kind of male perspectives, leading to health models where actually the male body is the default, has actually led to the entire body of healthcare research being focused on kind of firstly on the male body and also on health issues that either affect men and women or sort of link to a patriarchal idea of women's roles. So we know a lot about childbirth, we know very little about endometriosis, which only really affects women and isn't really linked directly anyway to their kind of ability to have there are links there, but it's not a direct clear link to their role as childbearers. So you see that actually the bias is in the bigger questions of who decides what we ask and why it matters. And so these feminist models and other kind of power focused models are all about saying, okay, we're looking at how do we reduce bias in those questions. And that leads to a kind of totally different set of approaches and questions. And we'll talk about some of them in more detail. But actually what I often see in kind of big NGOs, in academic institutions, even when they're trying to respond to this call, is actually you have a leader, a professor, a CEO deciding very quickly in quite a small space what the questions are and what matters. And then the participation and the engagement is all downstream. We've already got this question. Let's do some participatory work with communities to answer it. And actually what these tools do is say where we need that engagement, where we need that participation is right at the start. We need to engage people in defining what the change is that they want to see, what outcomes matter, and how it's measured. So it's a real kind of shift in thinking. And even I think it's important to be wary, because often even when you see institutions and organizations saying we do this, often what they mean is downstream participation, and what is required to redistribute power and to truly create shared knowledge is a fundamental shift in who decides what matters. And so I think that would be, I suppose, the key thing for disruption is actually who is involved right at the start of the process, and who gets to decide those key questions. And that is the only way to disrupt the power imbalances that we currently have in our knowledge systems. And it's the only way to change knowledge from being a tool that the most powerful people use to support their agendas, to answer their questions, to being something that is genuinely serving the interests of minoritized groups, of communities. So that, in short, is how we disrupt knowledge, and how we create knowledge that is more equitable. We put the people that knowledge is for in the driving seat. And I think now we're going to talk about more specific examples of how that might happen. And I saw a comment in the chat from Janine asking for specific resources. So I can actually have loads. So I can send anyone who's interested in getting that, I can send an email with like specific links to useful resources and webinars and all that kind of jazz in terms of upskilling. So yeah, if anyone else wants that, maybe pop a note in the chat and I can do an email, like a big email of a big resource dump. But back to you, Marl.
Thank you very much, Emily. So I think at this point, I know we have talked about some of the things that we feel can be done differently. So I think we can get into a little bit detail on doing MEARL differently. So me and Emily, we co-run the Lead Like a Feminist platform, where we share resources, and we also do different podcasts to, as we mentioned, disrupting. So we are also disrupting power and systems change. So in this during this moment, we would like to discuss what does doing MEARL differently look like, especially when we think about grassroots organizations with limited budgets or capacity. So as you can see on your screen, we have some suggested themes with we are going to give some quick examples. So when we talk about co-creation of indicators, it depends how you involve your community or the people you serve to define some of the indicators that they feel should be monitored dependent on whatever activity you're doing with them. So I can give an example of at Afrikala Art, where we work with children and young people. So there was this one particular point where we were in a discussion about mental health and life and the different things that affect young people. So you find that the participants did not want to share with us data the way we wanted to give them. So they kind of suggested a different approach to especially discussing emotions, and they came up with this emoji way to rate their mental health over time. So while you were discussing, they picked different colors and different emojis, and then they say that at the moment I feel so red and so angry because of how my school has been approaching failure and different things. So you find that at the end of the day, they were able to discuss how their emotions went from the beginning of the session to the end of the session, to the point where they felt hopeful with the probability of creating a change in terms of mental health and communication about their emotions. So I can urge most people who are working, especially with different populations, to try and find a way that they can co-create indicators, because there is a possibility in co-creating things that might feel more comfortable to the communities we serve, especially if we want to collect data from them. So we need to create a space where they feel comfortable to share about the change they feel is happening. So, and another bit is participatory sense making. So I know Emily might have a good example when it comes to participatory sense making. So Emily, you.
I do. Sorry, having unmuting issues with multiple screens. I do. So I thought it would be useful also just to illustrate the kind of the broader point I was making, to talk about the first piece of research I did with iRise and the last piece, because I think they're really good examples of what this shift means. So the first piece of work I did on menstrual health was a pilot randomized control trial looking at whether giving girls education and menstrual products would reduce school absenteeism. And with the best will in the world, we designed it at the University of Sheffield in collaboration with Kenyan colleagues, but academic, professional colleagues who were a world away from the schools. And we did talk to girls. We knew that it was an issue because they told us it was an issue. But actually we decided, okay, this is an issue. Here's a solution that makes sense. Here's the measure that matters. If we measure school engagement and attendance, that will fit really well with the narratives coming from big funders. And actually it means we'll be able to bring in more money, because actually if we can show it matters to these in girls education, it will then start to matter to government and to funders. So the best thing we can do is show that something simple affects what already matters, so that we can bring money and resource to this issue. And it sounds good, like it sounds nice, like it doesn't sound inherently damaging. But I think as we did that, we discovered I think the complexity of the issue, the deeply embedded stigma and norms, and also the I suppose the desire for girls not just to get what they needed, but to be agents in this process of defining kind of what they deserved in terms of their menstrual rights. And actually they wanted more than a pad and some education. They wanted respect, they wanted dignity, they wanted these much more bigger ethereal concepts that we couldn't study in a randomized control trial. The last piece of work I started before I left IRISE was a global exercise to redefine a new paradigm for menstrual health. We called it menstrual justice. And we brought together a steering group of experts and a committee of activists with lived experience from all over the world in all different contexts. And we went through a year-long process that finished after I left to co-create a understanding of what menstrual justice meant for these different communities in their different contexts. And one of the things that was very different was at the very start, we had everyone wanted a really simple intervention that could be done everywhere. Whereas in this piece of work, one of the key messages coming from the communities was actually we need things that are tailored to our context. We want shared principles so that we can communicate with each other, so we can support each other's advocacy, but we need things that can be contextualized, we need things that can be tailored, and actually there's no one size fits all answer, and we want to honor that. And so what they ended up with was a quite groundbreaking understanding of menstrual justice that goes well beyond products and education and looks at the systemic challenges that create the injustice in the first place, and a really simple framework that outlines principles that funders, organizations and activists can use to design programs and policies that honor that understanding of justice. And I think that shift, they're two very practical pieces of work. You can actually view them both. The report from the RCT is online, and the Scarlet Murmurations, the menstrual justice report, is online. And I think those two documents show over 10 years my shift. And I think they're a really good practical way of communicating what can seem quite ethereal. And the menstrual justice report itself is a really good example of participatory sense making and using kind of expert and lived experience to kind of shape new ideas and understandings, and to really look at what matters before you dive in and start saying we're going to do this, we're going to do that. Actually, what matters, why, and who does it matter to? And it's a really good example of how to answer those questions. So yeah, that was a long example, but hopefully a useful one. Mal, over to you for some of the other stuff.
So I think on the screen you can see that the next bit is community-led analysis. And how often do we find ourselves sharing stories because they are meant to serve us, as compared to serving the communities where we take those stories from? So at Afrikala Art, we have developed this way: community vote on the most significant change stories that they want us to share with our communities, and not just for us or external experts, because at the end of the day, we have to make sure that our communities feel dignified. So in most cases, you find that there is an opportunity that your community might help you be able to ensure that their stories remain dignified. And one of them is giving them an opportunity to tell you which are the best stories to share. And that is where you see, that is where we have commented that you can allow your community to vote on the most significant change stories. Because in most cases, we go to the field and ask them to tell us something, or we even give them a number of questions that they're supposed to answer. But in most cases, they are not aware where we are going to use those information. In most cases, we use them to apply for grants. And we do not tell them that these are the stories that we're going to use to apply for these grants, or this is the story that we are going to use on our social media. So in most cases, because we have like our communication plans, we can always create these stories way ahead of time and give them an opportunity to tell us if they're comfortable with us sharing those stories and how they want it shared. So I think community-led analysis is where we also allow them to understand exactly why we need certain data and what we are going to use that data for. And in most cases, you will find that that even gives them confidence in the work that you do. And also it gives them a little bit sense of ownership. And I think those are some of the things that ground in sustainability approaches, especially when it comes to feminist participatory MEL, because at the end of the day, it's giving people the power to own their voice. So the other bit is disaggregating by power, not just gender. So you find that there are so many ways that you can disaggregate data. In most cases, we are so used to saying this group of women, this group of girls, this group of men. And you find that that is where some of the problems start, someone said, because others might feel excluded if they do not match that gender or that specific category. So lately you can look at data by different things. You can look at it by age, by disability, by class, by status, by even regions, areas, especially when you're serving multiple communities. You can disaggregate data by those communities or other aspects that might comfortably reflect the number or the people that you are working with or that you are serving. So as we think of this, I think you can also share some of the ideas that you feel might be able to ensure, because I believe that some of the people here have already implemented some feminist MEL approaches and frameworks. So please feel free to share in the chat. And I think this will go directly to Emily, as we are just from describing so many things about feminist approaches. So Emily, I know you're a strong advocate for menstrual justice, and I believe that feminist MEL has shaped a number of things in the work that you have done over time, as you have just shared with us. So how has feminist MEL shaped how you've listened to and evaluated the impact of the work that you do with different communities?
Thanks, Molly. There's also just a question in the chat about what MERL stands for. And I honestly can't remember what the R's for. I wondered if you could take that one.
Yes, sure. I think I think I will just type it in, but there is MEAL, which is monitoring, evaluation, accountability, and learning. And there is also the R that also sometimes ends up there, like feminist MEAL, which is feminist monitoring, evaluation, accountability, research, and learning. Because at the end of the day, because there is some data gathering and analysis, that is where research comes in. And it becomes a very important component of MEL, because at the end of the day, we are supposed to make sense of all the data that we collect. And that's where this research component comes in. So I will also type it in the chat as Emily continues. Thank you.
Great. So I think I might actually talk a bit more broadly about some of the consultancy we've done together, Marl. Because I think, we're talking here about not like the global North's responsibility and how we kind of avoid reproducing kind of the same kind of power dynamics in the work that we do, that we're committed to kind of addressing. And I think there's a few things that I definitely saw at iRise, but I've also seen other organizations grapple with in terms of what that actually means for your day-to-day work, what that actually means for your practice. And I think the first sort of headline thing is actually this is quite a fundamental shift in how we understand the role of monitoring and evaluation. And it's a shift kind of away from evaluation actually towards embedded learning. So actually at the moment, or I suppose the norm, particularly in the era of DFID, was for evaluations to come right at the end of projects and to be very arm's length. So the gold standard was that you get somebody independent in, and they're keeping their distance. So they look at all the data, they maybe do a few interviews, but they're deliberately distant from the team and from the work because of this idea that that will somehow reduce their biases. And I think the shift is away from that towards actually saying we want to embed our learning and the people doing it in the team. And they can be independent consultants still, that's great. There's definitely value to having people coming with that kind of different positionality, but actually to do this work, the recommendation is that they're involved from the start and at multiple places through that journey. And actually there's more of a cycle of learning. So they don't come in at the end and just do a kind of slice through the work and say, this is what happened. Actually, it's much more iterative. So they might come in at the start and chat with the team. They might do something partway through and then work that into the programming as it evolves. And so I think that's one of the key shifts, is that if we want to do this work, we can't do those end of program snapshot evaluations. We need to switch to a more embedded approach, which actually can be really relieving, because I think the problem with those exercises is you do it, you get something that's a surprise, and actually the team can't do anything about it. There's also a real sense that you can't challenge it because they're the independent evaluator. Whereas actually in a more embedded approach, you make sense mutually of what you're finding as you find it, and it's much safer. It's a much safer space for the team. It's a much safer space for the communities, because it's not an assessment. It's a mutual exercise in understanding and creating that learning together. And I think that's the other key shift. I use the word assessment. So it's also a shift away from accountability and seeing evaluation as a kind of a part of that top-down power dynamic, away for funders, away for upstream partners to hold downstream partners to account. And it's actually shifting away from that and saying that, even though it sounds good, is actually quite an unpleasant power dynamic. We're wielding power over people. We're not helping them build their shared power. And so shifting away from that to actually it being a mutual, again, that idea of mutual sense making, or an opportunity for reflection. And I've seen organizations do that by kind of not, again, compressing everything at the end of the project, because actually that creates a lot of pressure and it inevitably creates this feeling of assessment, but trying to kind of stagger that learning process across the year. So it feels more routine. You don't have people having this frantic kind of scurry to bring everything together. And I think Marlene mentioned stories of greatest change, and that's a really good way of doing that, because what that method does is you effectively work together to create and capture stories throughout the work you're doing, and then you get together and discuss those stories and decide what they're telling you, which ones are most important. And actually that's a really beautiful process of building shared understanding, and it's also quite fun, quite energizing for teams, because they see the change they're creating live. They're not waiting for that end of project report to tell them if anything mattered. They can see that it matters, they can see where things are not working, and they can adjust. And so that kind of tool really lends itself to this shift away from kind of top-down evaluation towards embedded learning, away from seeing evaluation as a tool for accountability and towards seeing it as a way that we make sense of the world together. So that's a really important one, and that I've seen many organizations struggle with. Why do they struggle? I think because it requires shifting not just your evaluation, but your whole organizational approach. And we talked earlier on about how this is really about who makes decisions, ultimately who decides what matters, who decides how you measure it. So actually this shift is not, it can't just be done to the evaluation bit of the organization's work. It has to be embedded across multiple areas of operations. And that can be a really big challenge. No, embedded learning, I think it's similar to adaptive management, but I think it's a slightly different exercise. But yeah, I can certainly talk more about that separately. So I was just seeing Julian in the chat asking about adaptive management and embedded learning. We can certainly talk more about that though, if that's helpful. So yeah, so it needs to be embedded across the organization. So often there is a strategic process to enable this kind of work. Like you can't have your head of evaluation or your evaluation lead say, I want to do this. There needs to be a broader governance level exercise to say, actually, we commit to these values, and actually it may well mean changes to how we do other areas of work to facilitate this. It will certainly mean significant changes to budgeting. It will certainly mean changes to how you fundraise and how you write your bids and how you structure the learning and evaluation in those bids. It will probably mean changes to even things like the makeup of your board, because who has a say really matters. So I think that it's recognizing that it's a broader shift. And then there's a couple of other things as well that I think are really important that I've seen. So one is being comfortable with complexity. So I think we have a real drive to simplify things, and that comes from how we approach knowledge. Like, we want a simple solution that is easy to measure, that can give us a really nice stat that we can take back to the funder, and they'll be like, wow, that's a big number, that's wonderful. And I think there's a shift towards being more comfortable with complexity, because actually stories are inherently complex. Humans are inherently complex, and actually our way of understanding knowledge as a very kind of I suppose, looking for these very simple answers, looking for these very simple stats, it works in some contexts. It's really useful when you're testing a new drug, but it really doesn't work when you apply it to everything. And I think a lot of the work that we do on social change is one of those areas it should never have been applied to. We need to honour and recognise the complexity and live with it, and teach our funders to live with it, and help them recognise that that's actually what we're dealing with here. And I think linked to the simple solutions is also the idea that the change that we're looking at is very linear, whereas actually in social change, the changes usually comes in cycles. So it's kind of shifting our understanding to away from simple linear solutions towards more complex cyclical change. And that can be really difficult, and it can be really difficult for funders. And so that's a big challenge, but something that needs to happen. And then a couple of others I can talk more about, but I'll go back to Marl first. I think just some honesty about the trade-offs. Actually, this has real world trade-offs. If you shift to doing this kind of learning, some funders will not like you. At iRise, we had a meeting with a global funder who basically they would only fund work that had a randomized control trial. And we argued with them. We said, well, look, this issue is all about social norms. It's all about really complicated change. We can't take one solution and to tackle menstrual taboos and put it in every school, because actually every community has different taboos, different dynamics. And actually, if you make us simplify it, we will lose our impact. And they said, sorry, we need an RCT. And so there are some funders where this approach will shut the door. There are others where it will open opportunities, but I think being honest about some of the trade-offs that shifting to this approach means, and there are people who will look at your work and they'll look at the stories and say, well, that seems very wishy-washy. I don't really understand what you're telling me. Where's the stat? And they will see your work as less good quality because of their own biases. And so those are some of the trade-offs that I think we need to be honest about. And then just a final point about rigor. I think it's really important to recognize that this is not less rigorous, but that is a common thought that people will have. People will come back and say, actually, this is using qualitative data. This doesn't. You're not using it, and you can't. There are ways of using quantitative data as well, but you're not doing what I expect, a simple kind of quantitative survey. Therefore, it must be less rigorous. Whereas actually, this is more rigorous, because what we're doing is we're eliminating the biases before we do the research. We're actually working out what we need to know, and that makes it more rigorous. But that is an argument that needs to be had, and I think again it's being clear about that and honest about that, particularly if you're an organisation shifting from traditional evaluation to this kind of work, that some of your stakeholders will not come with you and some will. So yeah, and then there's a question about how to shift the funder. So the thing I love about all this work is it's all relational. So that in feminist evaluation and learning, there's a real focus on not eliminating relationships and trying to pretend they're not there, but embracing them. So actually saying, look, we're not objective. I'm not objective. I'm deeply shaped by my experiences, by my worldview, by my upbringing. It's silly for me to pretend that I'm not. So actually embracing your positionality and being honest about it. And also recognizing that everything is a relationship. Like we can't take our relationships out of these equations, our relationships to each other, our relationships to our environment, our relationships to more ethereal things like, how we understand the world. So actually, everything is about building meaningful relationships and connections. So when it comes to funders, that's what you model. Actually, let's build relationships, let's talk, let's have a dialogue. And we worked with some funders who were very traditional over a period of years. And as we started to shift, we actually invited them to the spaces where these conversations were happening. So we had, we had big meetings with activists from all over the world, with some of our community groups and the funder in the room. And we had an open dialogue. No, not putting on a good show, not showcasing our best work or, hiding the uncomfortable truths under the rug. We said, come to our reflection meeting. It's open. The people that you've been involved in funding will be there. You can ask any questions. They can tell you anything and we'll talk. And actually not every funder will take that well, but I think if it's a good relationship and a good partnership, that will spark a totally different dynamic with them. And we actually ended up with that funder. There were a couple of funders we took that approach with, and one left us a 5-year legacy grant when they wound up, and the other committed to a 3 or 4 year funding program with us in a totally experimental model that they had never tried before. So I think bring them into the relationships, help them to go on that journey, and model what you're trying to do, the honesty, the relational approach, the supportive kind of mutual power building rather than the kind of top down model. And actually a lot of people will think, oh, this is actually quite a relief and really enjoyable and makes my work much more joyful and much more interesting. So that would be my answer to that question about the funder. Mal, I'm going to go back to you because we've got 5 minutes left. I'm definitely going to shut up then and go back to you.
So thank you very much, Emily, for putting all that into perspective. And I personally usually say that building more equitable systems is all of our responsibilities. So I hope that today we come out with a sense of global shared responsibility of building more equitable systems, because MEAL is still an evolving field, especially for small organizations. We need to think about how we ensure that we are not just simplifying tools, but also decolonizing approaches, like what we measure and what do we measure and what do we value. I think that is also a very important question when it comes to us designing some of these systems that we usually create to measure, to collect, and also to share data. So as someone who grew up in an under-resourced community, I always asked myself the question on the screen, which is, what would it look like if people who lived the problem led the learning? And one of the best evaluation that I was part of was led by the people who are labeled beneficiaries. And once they were given that power, they flipped that power and defined their own success, which made us understand impact from their perspective. And that really changed a lot in my practice. I was able to understand that sometimes we tend to deny people the ability to share what they can do. And as we come to almost to the end of this, I usually I would like to ask I think all of us this particular question, like, what is that one radical truth that you've learned about MEL and power that has changed how you work? So first of all, it's thinking about how you have been doing things. For you to be able to change, you need to first understand things from how you have been doing things. Like how can you redistribute that power? Like ask yourself that question in who gets to speak, in how you share those findings. Like, why are we collecting this data? Why is it needed? And how will we share it? Will we share it in a way that objectifies our beneficiaries or something that maintains their dignity? So in your work, where can you distribute learning power, like as soon as possible? Is it how you ask a question? Is it who gets to speak? Is it how you share those findings? So I always feel that feminist MEL is not just a luxury, it's more of a responsibility, because it is our duty to honor stories, it is our duty to redistribute that power, and it is our duty to make learning a tool for justice. So I love this bit of if knowledge is power, then who is holding that pen? So I think those are some of the things that we really need to think about over and over again as we continue with this particular practice. And I think with the 2 or 3 minutes left, we can open the floor to anyone who has any question on Feminist MEARL or comment. To feel free to raise your hand or unmute and share.
Whilst people are thinking, conscious that we are coming up to the our natural comfort break. First of all, can I just say, for those who are listening on the podcast, you're going to have to go back and watch the video because I'm loving the imagery, Emily and Mal. It's beautiful, and I have just really enjoyed hearing that particular story around kind of that 10-year learning, that journey. It shows you kind of how long it can take to dismantle some of these systemic challenges and approaches that we have inherently done, which is if it's not got a number in it, and it doesn't say it's this many people said this much, and how it's taken time to dismantle that. So I think probably, I guess one of the messages I'm picking up on is that kind of perseverance and intention to try and make those changes. That it is this mutual experience, this mutual exercise. I love the fact that the point you pulled out around kind of we all have bias. There's just no way of getting around it. like, and why we're trying to kind of unpick it and think there's suddenly going to be this completely objective person that exists. But actually using that as part of our power. Um, and the kind of those final points that you've raised there as well, Marl, around actually it is our responsibility to think about who holds the pen, and that's from that very early days of what questions are we asking? Are we asking the right questions? Are we got the right people around the table to decide what the questions should be, through to how we're sharing the information and sharing those stories, how we're choosing. Love most significant change. Myself and Janine did a piece of work recently for a funder, using that approach, and it was just such a really powerful shift in the approach, and I think particularly in our case for the funder. And I also loved, Emily, just to finish, the island analogy right at the start. Yeah, we're going to just sit our ship, just throw the fruit over, and then we're going to look at it and we'll tell you if it's any good. I mean, that's definitely something that I love as a great analogy, and something that I think hopefully resonated and made a few people smile as well. And that actually at the end of it, there's some real positives, shifting and changing the views of funders, getting getting a grant and getting a legacy as a result of helping them to go on that journey with you. So yeah, just thank you both so much.